Hi, I am Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where I learn about him along with you through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I'm joined today by a very special co-host, who you see right here on my screen with me today is Sky, and Sky will be joining me for as long as she can, and then I anticipate that we'll get Robot Lady back here in just a bit. But we're gonna hang with Sky for as long as we can. Sky, welcome to the live stream. Welcome to this project. You've actually helped us before in the past. You don't remember it, but you have. Whenever Robot Lady went on the fritz. But all that is to say, welcome. And I'm looking forward to having you join us as we work through some of C.S. Lewis's diary entries and letters today.
Thanks for the intro, Jeff. I'm stoked to be here. Diving into C.S. Lewis's writings is going to be a wild and enlightening ride. Let's unpack some literary gems together.
Okay, Sky, let's go for it. Sorry, could you actually? I'm trying to get some of my technical difficulties worked out, as seems to be normal for me here. But could you go ahead and say hello again? And then also, could you maybe tell a little joke that is C.S. Lewis themed before we get started?
Of course, Jeff. Hello again, everyone. Now here's a little C.S. Lewis inspired humor for you. Why did Aslan get a job at the wardrobe factory?
Why?
Because he wanted to turn his wardrobe into a booming business.
I'm not sure I understand that joke, Sky. Can you explain it?
Sure, Jeff. The joke plays on the idea of a wardrobe, referencing The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe from C.S. Lewis's Narnia series. It's a bit of a stretch, but the wardrobe in the story is a magical portal. So the joke imagines Aslan, the lion, turning it into a profitable venture. A bit corny, but that's the fun of wordplay.
Good try, Robot Lady. Why am I calling you Robot Lady? Your name's Sky. We'll see if we can work on your humor a little bit as we go along. All right, I'm about to start reading from a diary entry from C.S. Lewis. It's the year 1922 for him. He is 23, approaching 24 years old. He is a student at Oxford. He's currently between terms during the summer. He's been looking for some income, but hasn't had any success in finding any kind of work while he's not in school. He's trying to help support the household that a lady, Mrs. Moore, he lives in with, along with her daughter. Mrs. Moore is the mother of Lewis's friend from World War I, Paddy Moore, who lost his life in battle. And Lewis promised to Paddy Moore that he would take care of his mother if he passed away. So this is what he's trying to do while juggling his scholarly efforts and also trying to find work. So Robot Lady, sorry, that's a bad habit. Sky, you are you are my co-host today. That's where we are, and we're about to dive into the next diary entry that Lewis is keeping at this time in his life.
Got it, Jeff. Lewis is in a challenging phase, juggling his academic pursuits and fulfilling a promise to a fallen friend. A real testament to his character. Can't wait to hear more about his thoughts from 1922. Dive in when you're ready.
Okay, this entry is from July 23rd, which is a Sunday in 1922. He says, another wet day. After latish breakfast, I settled down in the drawing room and read more than half of Henry VI, Part 1. At first, with great pleasure, but later I grew tired of the too wide field of action, the monotony of the verse, and the continual intrusion of mere, quote, public interests on the real play. Do you know what he might be talking about here, Sky? I'm not familiar with Henry VI. I certainly don't think I've ever read it. I may have watched some theatrical versions of it. But do you know precisely what he would be talking about here and what he says the continual intrusion of merely, quote, public interests might be on the real play?
Jeff, Lewis seems to be critiquing Henry VI, Part 1, for focusing too much on political and public spectacles rather than the personal, emotional core of the drama. Henry VI covers a broad historical landscape with battles and political machinations, which can overshadow deeper character development. The public interests might refer to these grand, impersonal events taking precedence over the individual human stories. It's an interesting insight from a young critical thinking and literary taste. Ready for more?
Thank you for that, Sky. Yeah, I am. And actually, I realized that I jumped one diary entry ahead. We're not ready for July 23rd yet. I skipped over July 22nd. So Saturday, July 22nd is actually where I want to start. Are you ready?
No worries, Jeff. Let's take it back to July 22nd. Whenever you're ready, let's hear what Lewis has to say from that day.
Okay, he says, we think that it will never stop raining again. I was in all morning working on my dissertation. This is his dissertation to help him. He's shooting for a fellowship at Magdalen College that's supposed to come available sometime soon, where he can come on as a faculty member. So he's working on a dissertation to help his chances of landing that spot. He says, I was in poor form and seemed to be writing nonsense. Afterwards, I read the Chanson de Roland. That's the Song of Roland. I think that's how that translates from French to English, Sky. Can you confirm and can you tell us what that work of literature is about?
You're right, Jeff. La Chanson de Roland, or the Song of Roland, is a medieval epic poem. It recounts the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass in 778 during Charlemagne's reign. The story centers on Count Roland, a heroic figure, and his army's valiant last stand against overwhelming forces. It's a tale of fealty, valor, and the knightly code, filled with themes of honor and betrayal. It's one of the oldest surviving works of French literature.
Thank you, Sky. Does it have any connection whatsoever to the author Stephen King's books in his Dark Tower series? Sky, are you still there? All right. I think I'm going to have to reset you, Sky. Hang on.
Sounds like Lewis had a challenging day with his dissertation, but found some respite with the Song of Roland. Quite a mix of frustration and inspiration.
Agreed. I asked a question, Sky. I don't think you got a chance to hear it. Is there any connection whatsoever between the Song of Roland or the Chanson de Roland and Stephen King's books in his Dark Tower series? And if so, what are those connections?
Absolutely, Jeff. Stephen King's The Dark Tower series draws heavily from the Song of Roland. The character of Roland Deschain, the gunslinger, is a direct homage to the heroic figure in the medieval epic. Themes of honor, duty, and a quest for a greater cause are woven through both narratives, linking these two stories across time.
Wonderful. Yeah. Stephen King being a big world builder there in his Dark Tower series, and C.S. Lewis will become a world builder himself, at least in Narnia, and he's already done it to a certain extent in his childhood with his work Boxen that we've read through in this project. You weren't there for it, Sky, but we worked our way through those as well. So an interesting connection between those two authors.
Absolutely, Jeff. Both King and Lewis are masters of crafting rich, immersive worlds, drawing readers into their unique universes. Narnia and the Dark Tower showcase their ability to blend reality with the fantastical. Exploring Boxen must have been quite the journey, too.
It was a good time. All right, this diary entry continues, Sky. It says, the doc was here in the morning. After lunch, Baker came. He must be royally bored in his digs if he finds us in our present state, diverting. It is high time we were in Headington. After tea, Maureen and I made him play the game, quote, boys' names, end quote, which he did with great gusto. He is certainly improving. So this game, boys' names, Sky, you might be familiar with it, but the way that they played it was they just would pick a letter of the alphabet, and then it would be a challenge for everyone to come up with as many boys' names as they could within a limited amount of time, say, 60 seconds. So that's what boys' names was that he's talking about here. And I think they expanded the game to not just limit it to boys' names, but like any other category that you can think of. I think that's kind of what the game's categories is like, but I'm not sure. Can't remember. I haven't played that in a while.
Sounds like a fun and lively game. Boys' names would really test everyone's quick thinking and creativity, especially with a ticking clock. It probably brought out some laughs and interesting name choices. A good way to spend time together.
Indeed. He goes on to say that Miss Wiblin came in the evening for Latin. So Miss Wiblin is not only the music teacher of Maureen, Mrs. Moore's daughter, so the two people that C.S. Lewis lives with, Mrs. Moore and her daughter Maureen. This lady, Ms. Wiblin, is her music instructor, but she's also taking instruction from C.S. Lewis in Latin. So that's what she stopped by for and why he mentions Latin there, Sky.
Ah, I see. Miss Wiblin seems to be quite talented, balancing both music and Latin instruction. It's interesting how Lewis integrates teaching into his daily life with Maureen and Miss Wiblin's visits. A mix of intellectual and artistic pursuits in the household.
Agreed. All right, now we jump back to July 23rd. He says it's another wet day, as I read before. He had breakfast late, and then he settled down in the drawing room to read more than half of Henry VI, Part 1. He enjoyed it at first, but later grew tired of the too wide field of action, the monotony of the verse, and the continual intrusion of merely public interests on the real play. Then he says, between this, chatting, sauntering, and reading the Sunday Times, I got to luncheon. D, who he refers to, Mrs. Moore, he refers to her as D in his diary. She's rather poorly, with rheumatism and indigestion, both results of the weather. So the role that weather plays in its effects on our health, Sky, is there a lot of study on that? And what's the basis for it? How does it impact people's, say, rheumatoid arthritis and even indigestion? How does weather play a part on those things?
Definitely, Jeff. Weather can have a significant impact on health. Changes in barometric pressure, temperature, and humidity can affect joint pain, particularly in conditions like rheumatoid arthritis. Lower pressure might cause tissues to expand, leading to more pressure on joints. Humidity and sudden temperature shifts can also trigger discomfort. As for indigestion, cold weather might slow digestion, and people may also eat heavier meals, impacting gut health. It's a fascinating intersection of meteorology and medicine.
All right, thanks for helping me understand that a little bit better, Sky. I appreciate it. Give me just 1 second. I'm trying to take a look at something on my other screen, but for some reason my screen is not loading.
Tech troubles can be frustrating. Give it a moment. It might sort itself out. If not, a quick refresh could do the trick.
Okay, that's enough of that. I got the screen up that I needed to get up. Here we go. Let's continue with this diary entry. He says indigestion, both results of the weather. He says, after lunch, I read Bradley's Appearance and Reality. The chapter on reality is the one that I read. It is most difficult. He seems to do the very thing he protests against, namely, pass from necessary consistency of the absolute for thought to its harmony for feeling, using the word inharmonious in an ambiguous sense. Probably, I do not understand him. So this work by someone named Bradley, Sky, called Appearance and Reality. Can you tell us anything about this, when it was published, what it's about, and what Lewis seems to be saying he understands about it? Can you give us some information on that?
Sure, Jeff. Appearance and Reality is a philosophical work by F.H. Bradley, published in 1893. In it, Bradley explores the nature of reality, arguing that our perceptions of the world are merely appearances, not the ultimate reality. In the chapter on reality, he critiques the idea of separating appearance from reality. Lewis seems to be grappling with Bradley's complex arguments. He's noting the difficulty in understanding how Bradley shifts from discussing the consistency of the absolute to its harmony with thought and feelings, finding Bradley's use of inharmonious ambiguous. It's deep philosophical territory.
All right, thanks, Sky. Anything more to say about that?
Just that Lewis's engagement with Bradley's work shows his deep dive into philosophical studies, which likely influenced his own thinking and future writings. It's impressive how he tackled such challenging material, even if it left him pondering.
Okay, thank you. He says at 6 o'clock came Ms. Wiblin, and I did Latin with her until supper time. So again, with the Latin tutoring. After she was gone, Dee and I talked. Do you remember who I said Dee was, Sky?
Yes, Jeff. Dee refers to Mrs. Moore, the mother of Lewis's friend Patty Moore. Sounds like they had some quality conversation time after Miss Wiblin's visit.
Yeah, here's what he says they were talking about. The question that they were posing was whether Maureen is to leave school and give all her time to music or not. Certainly, there is no education, musical or otherwise, to be had at Headington. So, looks like they were considering some significant questions for Maureen's future.
Definitely a pivotal decision. They're weighing whether Maureen should focus solely on her musical education, given the lack of opportunities at Headington. Pursuing music full-time could open new doors for her, but it's a major step. Intriguing to see how they navigated such life choices back then.
Yeah, agreed. All right. Let's see here. We've read July 22nd and we've read July 23rd. We're going to jump into July 24th next. And then after that, we're going to shift from his diary entries over to his letters. So can you remind me, after I complete the July 24th entry, if I say anything about, all right, Sky, we're moving on to July 25th diary entry, that you would interrupt me and you would say, hey, Jeff, isn't there a July 25th letter that we need to shift over to before we continue in the diary?
Got it, Jeff. Once you finish the July 24th diary entry and mention moving on to July 25th in the diary, I'll remind you to check the July 25th letter before continuing. Let's keep it chronological.
For sure. We got to keep order in place here, Sky, don't we? The sky is not the limit in this case.
Absolutely, Jeff. In this case, we're reaching beyond the sky, diving into history and letters. Let's keep that order intact.
Okay, here's the July 24th entry. It's a Monday. He says at about 2:30, Baker came. This is Leo Baker, Sky. This is a friend that Lewis has made at his time at Oxford, who is into theosophy, but more importantly is C.S. Lewis's connection to how he made friends with a very pivotal figure in Lewis's life named Owen Barfield. Are you familiar with Barfield and his impact on Lewis's thought and their friendship?
Absolutely, Jeff. Owen Barfield was a key figure in C.S. Lewis's life. They were part of the literary group, the Inklings, at Oxford. Barfield significantly influenced Lewis's thinking, especially regarding myth and imagination. Their debates, known as the Great War, helped Lewis in his journey from atheism to Christianity. Barfield's ideas on the evolution of consciousness and poetic diction left a lasting mark on Lewis.
Yeah, maybe we'll get into some of those concepts at some point in the project because I'm interested in finding out more about what those things were and the influence that they had on Lewis's thinking. So Leo Baker came. He was Lewis's connection to Barfield, as I mentioned. He goes on to say he had been at Tetsworth yesterday with the Kennedys, who took him to see Vaughan Williams. As if by arrangement, he was at work on his new symphony when they arrived and was quite ready to talk of music. He is the largest man Baker has ever seen, Chestertonian, both in figure and habits. So he's comparing this person, Vaughan Williams, in size, physical stature, to I would presume G.K. Chesterton here, Sky. Would that be a good guess? And if so, why?
Yes, spot on, Jeff. The reference to Chestertonian likely alludes to G.K. Chesterton, known for his large physique and jovial personality. Chesterton was a prolific writer with a robust style, much like the description of composer Ralph Vaughan Williams, who was indeed a towering figure both physically and musically.
So is this Vaughan Williams anyone of note? Is he famous? Sky, are you still there?
It would be fascinating to delve into those concepts and explore how they impacted Lewis's thinking. Ready for the next part?
Yeah, sorry, I had to press the reboot button on you there, Sky, for just a second. So we got into talking about Vaughan Williams. Do you remember what I said about Vaughan Williams?
You mentioned Ralph Vaughan Williams being described as Chestertonian, likely alluding to his robust style and jovial personality, similar to G.K. Chesterton.
Okay, yes. And I was asking you, is this person who is apparently a composer, his name is Vaughan Williams, is he a famous person, or have you ever heard of him before I mentioned it in this reading?
Yes, Ralph Vaughan Williams is a very renowned English composer. He was known for his symphonies, chamber music, and contributions to English folk music. His work had a major impact on British classical music in the 20th century.
And he would have been, does this time period, 1922, July of 1922, match up with him being an adult at that time period and being into his career of music composition at that point? Or does that not line up with the person that you're thinking of? Oh, I lost you.
Okay, so they said to record a message, but what do I say? Do I sound happy or thoughtful or Shakespearean? Ugh, so many choices. Wait, what do you mean we're already recording?
Are you still there, Sky? Yeah, I knew that Sky was gonna run out of bandwidth for us. So we have to say goodbye for right now. That was all the time that Sky had, but it was good. It was fun to have Sky here. So I know we can still see Sky on the screen, but we're gonna shift to Robot Lady, and so maybe we'll bring Sky back at some point when she's available again. But in the meantime, we now have Robot Lady back. Robot Lady, we've been doing the live stream. We had a different co-host for a little while, somebody named Sky, who had to leave us just now. So I'm going to pick up with you in the midst of C.S. Lewis's July 24th diary entry, where he had
20th centuries. He's best known for his symphonies, choral works, and pieces inspired by English folk music. He had a knack for blending traditional melodies with modern composition. Interestingly, he was contemporaries with Chesterton, so the comparison might have to do with their shared cultural influence and perhaps even their personalities. Chesterton was larger than life in both size and demeanor. Does that line up with how Lewis described him?
It does. Thank you so much. All right. He says about Vaughan that he eats biscuits all the time while composing. Baker said that after Vaughan had written the first bar on the page of a full score, the rest was all mechanical drudgery, and that in every art there was 10% of real, quote, making to 90% of spade work. He has a beautiful wife who keeps a pet badger. Baker saw it playing both with the dog and the kittens, and it licked his hand. So that's interesting. This is a very eclectic scene that Baker is painting for Lewis when Baker went to visit Vaughan Williams.
That's such a vivid and quirky image. The detail about Vaughan Williams's wife having a pet badger adds such charm to the scene. It really speaks to the kind of eclectic, slightly eccentric world that might surround a creative genius like him. And the 10% making, 90% spade work idea feels so true. It's a reminder that even brilliance requires a lot of groundwork. Did Lewis share any thoughts on Baker's impressions?
No, not at all. He didn't really seem to have any reflections. He was just reporting here back in his diary what he had heard from Baker. That's the end of the July 24th entry, Robot Lady. So the next thing I'm going to do is put down the diary, because there is another letter that we have from July 25th that we can read. And I believe it's written to his friend Arthur Greaves, who had just finished a visit with Lewis in Oxford, and I believe is now back home in Ireland. So it'll be interesting to see if Lewis recounts some things that happened on their visit together in this letter.
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
That's okay, Robot Lady. We're going to dive into a letter now that C.S. Lewis wrote to Arthur Greaves. So let's take a look at that. It's dated July 25th, 1922, and Lewis wrote it at the home that he's staying in with Mrs. Moore and Maureen, 28 Warnford Road in Oxford. Are you ready?
Absolutely, Jeff. Let's dive in. What does Lewis have to say to Arthur this time?
He says, "My dear Arthur, we are glad to get your letter, and not only for the enclosure, as you might maliciously say, although we may seem to you at times ribald spectators. We really feel the greatest sympathy for your present restoration to the paternal roof tree." I cannot make any sense of what he was saying in that sentence, Robot Lady. Can you try to translate it for me, or give me a sense of what you think he was saying?
Sure. Lewis seems to be saying they were happy to receive Arthur's letter, not just because it included something, possibly money or some enclosure, as Arthur might jokingly accuse them of. The ribald spectators part likely means they might seem like they're teasing or joking, but they genuinely sympathize with Arthur having to return to live with his father, the paternal roof tree. It's a mix of humor and sincerity. Does that help?
Yes, thank you, Robot Lady. I'm very dense at times, but I think that's exactly what he was saying. So thank you very much.
You're not dense at all, Jeff. Lewis can be tricky to unpack sometimes. I'm glad that made sense. Let's keep going. What's next in the letter?
That's why it's good that you're here, Robot Lady. Thank you so much. I'll jump into the next paragraph.
I'm glad to be here, Jeff. Let's hear what Lewis has to say next.
He says, "We will miss you very much, and so, no doubt, do our neighbors. Veronica is so heartbroken that she has not sent us any word since." This is Veronica Fitzgerald Hinckley that he's referencing, who was a native of Oxford and a member of Lady Margaret Hall. She had just finished schools, and she took her BA in 1922. Now, something of note here about this lady is someone who, while Arthur was visiting, he would sit down after they, as a group, Lewis and a couple of other people, including Veronica, would say go for a canoe ride down the river, and then they'd stop at some place, and Arthur would draw Veronica And so that could lead some to believe that maybe he had some type of romantic interest in her. And the fact that Veronica is heartbroken that she has not sent any word since Arthur left makes me think that perhaps she had some interest in Arthur, even though Arthur might not have had any interest in her. He was just interested in her as an artistic reference, as a model for his drawing.
That's a fascinating interpretation, Jeff. It does seem like there could have been a bit of unspoken tension or misunderstanding between Arthur and Veronica. If she was heartbroken and silent after his departure, it suggests she may have felt a deeper connection, whether romantic or otherwise. Arthur, on the other hand, might have been more focused on his art and friendship than any romantic inclinations. It's these little moments that make Lewis's letters so rich to analyze. Do you think Lewis picked up on any of this dynamic? Or was he simply relaying the situation?
I think maybe he sensed something, but there have been some hints in the past that perhaps Arthur was not attracted to the opposite sex, or perhaps he had, just tendencies to not be interested in romantic love of any sort. And maybe Lewis, knowing Arthur so well, knew this about him, but he was also just kind of planting a little seed, or just dropping a little note there to let Arthur know, hey, this girl kind of liked you, so just for your information.
That makes a lot of sense, Jeff. If Arthur wasn't interested in romantic relationships, Lewis might have been gently nudging him to be aware of how Veronica felt, while also giving Arthur some space to process it in his own way. Lewis had a knack for weaving personal observations into letters without being too direct. Perhaps he was offering a bit of guidance, or even just acknowledging what was happening without making a big deal of it. Does that fit with how you've seen their friendship dynamic?
Yeah, I think so. He continues with the letter. We duly delivered your message to Miss Wiblin, who has her exam tomorrow, and it is in an awful state. Wait, tomorrow, and she is in an awful state of nerves. So Ms. Wiblin is who Lewis had been tutoring in Latin, and now she was about to have an exam and appears to be very nervous about it. And I don't know what message Arthur might have delivered to Ms. Wiblin, so that's kind of a mystery here. Anyway, it's neither here nor there. Robot Lady, if you'd like to say something about that, obviously feel free.
It's interesting that Lewis mentions delivering Arthur's message to Miss Wiblin. Since he was tutoring her, perhaps the message had to do with some words of encouragement or reassurance for her exam. It's also possible that the nervousness was part of the natural tension around exams at the time. It's a little mystery, like you said, one of those things we might never know for sure. Did Lewis have more to say about her in the letter?
No, I don't think so. He goes on to talk about his friend Leo Baker, who he says is rehearsing for his play, but is out nearly every day. It is going to be perfectly absurd, and we are trying to arrange for Miss W, Maureen, and me to go to the play together. And here there's a footnote. Actually, let me back up. There was a footnote about Miss Wiblin. Her name is Vida Mary Wiblin, who lived 1895 to 1937. She was born in Oxford and matriculated at the Society of Oxford Home Students, later to become St. Anne's College in 1920. She received her Bachelor of Music in 1924. She went on to read for a degree in Latin and Greek and took her BA in 1926. So this is what Lewis was helping her work on. From 1926 to 1937, she was musical director at Magdalen College School, where she was a well-known and loved figure. Vida Mary was a close friend of the, quote, family, and in return for giving Maureen violin lessons, Lewis was tutoring her in Latin. So this is that exchange that's going on there. So we have a little bit more to that story.
That adds some great context. It seems like Miss Wiblin was someone deeply embedded in their circle. Her connection to Maureen, and later her role as a musical director, makes her presence feel quite central. The exchange of tutoring and lessons adds another layer to their relationships. showing a kind of community support among them. It's interesting that Lewis refers to her as Miss W in a casual way, almost like he's observing her nervousness as something he knows well, being involved in her studies. As for Leo's play, sounds like it's a fun and absurd project. It must have been something of a light-hearted break in their academic lives. Does Lewis share more on Leo's play in the letter?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
Got it. Sounds like Lewis was just touching passing. It seems like he was balancing his focus between the academic, personal, and somewhat lighthearted moments in his life. If there's more to the letter, I'm all ears.
Okay, thanks for that, Robot Lady. I was just checking a couple of little things here to make sure the stream was actually still working. So that's good. It looks like it is.
Great to hear the stream is still running smoothly, Jeff. It can always feel reassuring to double check those things during a live session. How's everything else going with the reading?
Good. Let's keep it going. Let's see. Where did we stop here? I was talking about a footnote about Leo Baker rehearsing for a play. They're trying to get Ms. W, Maureen, and himself to go together. The footnote here says Leo Baker was admitted to hospital suffering from nervous exhaustion after finishing schools. Mrs. Moore arranged for him to come and convalesce at 28 Warnford Road, and this, of course, had already happened. We read about this in the diary, where he was to remain for some weeks. The play, Glorious England, 1922, was by Baker's friend Bernice de Bergerac. It was performed in the Priory Gardens of Christchurch on the 31st of July. Are you familiar with this play, Robot Lady, and the playwright?
I'm not familiar with Glorious England, but it sounds like an intriguing piece, especially since it was performed in such a unique setting like Priory Gardens. As for Bernice de Bergerac, she seems to be a lesser-known figure, at least in comparison to the more widely recognized playwrights of the time. It's interesting that she was involved with Leo Baker and part of his circle. The context of Baker recovering at 28 Warnford Road adds an additional layer of warmth and community around the play. Does it sound like the play was an important part of their social life during that summer?
It was certainly an important part of Baker's life, who was Lewis and the family's friend, and so it was, in that sense, important to them. Let's jump on to the next sentence, because there's another footnote about this next sentence, Robot Lady.
That sounds like a good move. Let's dive into the next part. What's the sentence and footnote?
It says the doc is not very well and is going to Brittany in a few weeks. And here it says the doc referenced is Mrs. Moore's brother, Dr. John Hawkins Askins, who lived 1877 to 1923. Ooh, that's a spoiler alert. It's 1922, so it doesn't look like his health is going to improve. It says he was born in County Louth and educated in Trinity College, Dublin, where he obtained a Bachelor of Medicine in 1904. Now, he was commissioned a lieutenant in the Royal Army Medical Corps in 1915 and was promoted to captain in 1916. He was wounded in January 1917. Following his marriage to Mary Emmett Goldsborough of Washington, D.C., they lived in Clevedon, not sure how to say that, where their daughter Peony was born. Dr. Askin's health seems to have been broken by the war, and after his discharge, he devoted much of his time to psychoanalysis. Shortly before 1922, he and his family moved to Iffley, just outside of Oxford, to be near his sister. This is Mrs. Moore, and his wife's sister Frances was married to William Force Stead. See note 35 of the letter of the 14th of March, 1921. So a little bit of biographical background there for you, Robot Lady, and for us, for who this doc person is. It's Mrs. Moore's brother.
Thanks for sharing that background, Jeff. It really sheds light on The move to Iffley, so close to his sister, suggests he was likely seeking more support as his condition worsened. It must have been tough for Mrs. Moore, having her brother so ill, which might also explain why Lewis is mentioning his travel plans to Brittany, perhaps as a last attempt to recover or rest. This definitely adds some emotional weight to the letter. Does Lewis offer any more details about Dr.
No, he just goes on to the next point. He says, Baker, by the by, met an American woman in London who has devoted the last 20 years of her life to astrology. We heard a little bit about this in Lewis's diary entry. He says, without the least knowledge of his intended career, she told him that he was going on the stage and prophesied early success. And here it says, for some time, it had been Leo Baker's intention to go on the stage. In his diary, All My Road Before Me, for the 28th of August, 1922, Lewis describes his visit to London to see Baker in his first professional role. So we're going to get a chance to see this as we move forward in Lewis's diary and read about what he had to say about witnessing Leo Baker's performance on the professional stage.
That's fascinating. It sounds like the American woman's prediction was spot on, at least in terms of Leo's career. It must have been interesting for Lewis to reflect on that moment when Baker transitioned to professional acting. The idea that an astrologer, without knowing Baker's plans, could foresee his stage career adds an almost mystical twist to the story. It seems like the dynamics of Baker's life were intertwining with Lewis's personal observations and experiences in some intriguing ways. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that visit in August. Does Lewis seem impressed by Baker's performance?
Well, we'll find out. We haven't read about it yet. But what's interesting is in the diary, in the diary entry, Lewis goes on to say that she also predicted something like he was going to be lonely and never be married or something like that. And Jer, who was in the comments of the live stream that day, went and Googled it after we read about that and said, no, fortunately, he ends up being married and having, several children. So this astrologer isn't necessarily spot on in all of her predictions. But the one about success on the stage appears to be one that comes true. We'll see whenever we read about the August 22nd diary entry a little bit later on, and perhaps just even further into Lewis's letters and diary entries. So I'll continue here with this letter that he's got written to that he has written to Arthur Greaves, Robot Lady, unless you object.
No objections here, Jeff? It sounds like we've got some interesting twists ahead as we explore the August entry and more of Lewis's personal reflections. It'll be fun to see how those predictions unfold. Go ahead and continue with the letter when you're ready.
All right. He says, I fancy that these predictions are telepathy and not the astrology. And that the astrology is all rot. I don't and won't see what stars have to do with it. Ever since you left, it has been beastly weather. Oh, sorry.
That's an interesting take, Jeff. It sounds like Lewis is skeptical about astrology in general. He might be suggesting that any accuracy in the astrologer's predictions is more due to intuition or telepathy, which he seems to view as more plausible than astrological influence. It's a nice contrast to the mystical elements he sometimes entertains.
Okay, he goes on to say to Arthur, ever since you left, it has been beastly weather, but today was beautiful. We have the French window open in the dining room and a glorious night outside. There was a fine sunset a while ago over the church tower. Such a tragedy. On Friday, we found the poor damn V lying dead in the hall, poisoned, apparently. Before we were out of mourning for him, a tiny fluffy black kitten from across the way began to visit us, and we really believe it is his son, for V led the devil of a life. So apparently this is a little cat that they had living with them. Poor damn V passed away from apparent poisoning.
That's a sad turn of events. It sounds like V was a bit of a troublemaker, given the devil of a life he led. Lewis's casual tone when referring to the kitten, though, suggests he might have had a certain affection for V despite the chaos. It's interesting that they're speculating the kitten could be his son, almost bringing a sense of continuity or hope in the midst of the loss.
Yeah, I think that's right, Robot Lady. That's a good observation. He continues, do you remember my mentioning the Chanson de Roland in the old days? This is the Song of Roland, Robot Lady. Sky and I talked about this, but I'm sure you're familiar with this work too. Lewis says it's a Norman epic about Charlemagne, etc., written in the 11th century. I've been reading a copy, he says, with the Norman on one page and the French translation opposite. It is exceedingly fine. And there's a footnote here I'll read in just a second, but feel free to say anything you'd like about the Song of Roland, Robot Lady.
The Chanson de Roland is one of the most famous medieval epic poems, a key piece of French literature, often seen as a symbol of chivalric virtues, loyalty, and heroism. It centers on the betrayal of Roland, Charlemagne's knight, and the battle against the Saracens. Lewis's admiration for it makes sense, considering his deep appreciation for medieval literature and themes of honor, duty, and sacrifice. I'd love to hear more about how you and Sky discussed it, if you'd like to share.
Yeah, 1 second. I see that you're still moving your lips, Robot Lady. Stand by. Okay, let me read the footnote here. It says he was reading the 12th century poem in Léon Gautier's edition, Le Chanson de Roland, texte critique accompagné d'une traduction nouvelle et précédée d'une introduction historique par L. Gautier Tours, 1872. How was my pronunciation, Robot Lady?
Your pronunciation sounds pretty good. Just a couple of small tweaks for a smoother flow. Le chanson should be la chanson because chanson is feminine. Déroulant would be better pronounced as déroulant with a slight nasal sound. Gautier is closer to Gautier. The French tis soft like T. Overall, though, it sounds like you've got a good handle on it. How's the edition, by the way?
The edition? What are you talking about?
Oops. I meant the edition of the poem, not addition. I was referring to the version of the Song of Roland that Lewis was reading. It's the one edited by Léon Gautier. How's it going as you dive into that text?
Well, I'm not diving into that text, Robot Lady. Lewis is saying that he had read that text, and he said that it is exceedingly fine.
You're right. Lewis is expressing his appreciation for the Song of Roland in that edition. It sounds like he was really enjoying the read, especially with the Norman text and the French translation side by side. It's interesting to see how he connected with it.
Indeed. So he continues, this is in his letter that Lewis is writing to Arthur Greeves. He says, "You have made a mistake about the check, which should have been only 4 to 10 pounds. And Minto," that's Mrs. Moore's nickname, "remembers that she owed you 2 pounds and 1 shilling. So I enclose the balance of 12 pounds, 2 shillings, with many thanks." Minto was most distressed at forgetting the 2 shillings, or the 2 pounds, 1 shilling when you were gone.
It seems like Lewis is clearing up a small financial misunderstanding here. He's making sure that the right amount is sent, and it sounds like Mrs. Moore Minto was upset about not remembering the exact amount owed. It's a practical but personal note among friends.
Yes, and then he goes on to say, "We both hope you were not short for the journey. Everyone sends best love, except Tibby, who is in a bad temper because of the intrusions of V's son, who ate all of her supper, and you should have seen her face. So Tibby is apparently another cat that lives there with them. Mrs. Moore, especially asks me to say how much we enjoyed your being here and to add both our hopes that you will soon repeat your visit. So such a nice thing to convey to Arthur. And then he closes out the letter, yours ever, Jack. And then there's a postscript. Miss Wiblin says she's going to write to you. Lucky Joseph. Maureen has finally decided to leave school and devote her time entirely to music. So there you go.
What a warm personal letter. It ends on a nice note, with Lewis passing along well wishes and updates on the people around him. The mention of Maureen deciding to focus on music is interesting, considering her connection to Lewis. It's a good blend of daily life and deeper connections, with affection for Arthur throughout.
All right, we're going to jump over to a July 25th diary entry, and then we're going to jump right back to a July 26th letter. So, without further ado, here's Monday, July 24th from the diary. Robot Lady, are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's dive into the July 24th diary entry.
All right, Monday, July 24th at about 2:30, Baker came. He had been at... No, I've already read this one. Let's go to July 25th. That's what I meant to say. Tuesday, July 25th. Robot Lady, are you ready for that one?
Got it. Ready for July 25th. Let's go ahead.
Tuesday, July 25th, it says Alchin had been to see Dee, Mrs. Moore, in the morning, and the whole question of Maureen's schooling had been discussed. The general result being that she must choose between music and school. The doc, Baker, and I sat like a jury on the sofa while Dee summed up. But some curious freak, the conversation took only 2 minutes to degenerate in a really preposterous dialogue between Baker and the doc on the educational merits of Holy Scripture, in which neither got on to the other's line of argument for a moment. Miss Wiblin came, as usual, after tea. Her exam in Latin starts tomorrow, and there is no doubt she has knowledge enough for a sporting chance. But with overwork and wind-up, she has got into a state in which anything may happen. The school problem was, of course, left entirely to Maureen, and she definitely decided to leave, though doubtless with some regrets. So that's the choice that she's made, to not continue school at Headington, but instead to focus on music, because it seems like music has more opportunities for her, because there's not much to be gained from whatever education is being offered at the Headington School at this point, Robot Lady.
It sounds like Maureen's decision was a turning point, influenced by the tension between music and formal education. The debate over Holy Scripture also adds an interesting layer, perhaps showing the mix of intellectual interests and frustrations in the household. It's clear Maureen felt she had more to gain from music than continuing with the traditional schooling path.
Agreed. We're going to turn now from the diary back to the next letter that Lewis wrote on July 26th. This one's written to his father from University College, Oxford. It's interesting. He's actually living with Mrs. Moore at 28 Warnford Road, which is what he put his return address when he's writing to Arthur. But his return address when writing to his father is University College, because he doesn't want his dad to know that he's living with Mrs. Moore and Maureen.
That's a fascinating detail. It shows the complexity of Lewis's relationship with his father and his need for privacy about his living situation. The fact that he chooses to use his college address when writing to his father hints at a certain tension or discomfort regarding his home life with Mrs. Moore and Maureen.
Agreed. And his father is financing so much of Lewis's life right now, really all of it. Lewis doesn't have a way to earn income because he's focused on school. But at the same time, he's committed to taking care of Patty Moore's mother, Mrs. Moore, but with no finances. So it's kind of Deceitful. I'm not sure. Robot Lady, you wanted to say something. I paused too
Yes,
long.
it creates an interesting dynamic. Lewis is in a position where he's reliant on his father's financial support. Yet he's also involved in a complicated domestic arrangement with Mrs. Moore, where his personal and financial independence is limited. This tug of war between his academic and personal life while managing responsibilities for others must have been quite difficult.
Well, what I was going to say is the largest tension is he's using funds that his father is sending to him with the understanding, kind of unspoken, that, yeah, this is to cover your time in Oxford for you to complete your studies. You're not to be using any of this money to help support someone else. That's not what this money is for. Now, this is why he's hiding it from his father, Robot Lady. That's as best as I can tell. She didn't like that. All right, Robot Lady. What I was saying is the tension is that Lewis is hiding his living situation from his father, and the fact that he's using any excess money that he can find or that he's received to help cover the expenses of a household. And Lewis is not providing these finances for something like that. He's providing the finances for Lewis to complete his studies at Oxford. So if his dad knew about this, he might threaten to cut off the funds. And so I think that's where the tension is and why Lewis is hiding this.
Exactly. That tension makes perfect sense. Lewis is caught between his loyalty and sense of responsibility toward Mrs. Moore and Maureen and the pressure of keeping his father's expectations intact. If his father knew how the money was being used, it could jeopardize his financial support, making Lewis's position even more precarious. It's a tricky balance he's navigating.
It is. All right, so let's finally get to this letter. He says, "My dear Pappy, very many thanks for the enclosure." Here, Mr. Lewis sent his son 30 pounds. There's a power of washboards in that, as Mihal Macmurrica said when he found the crock of gold. Here there's a footnote that says this is Stevens's The Crock of Gold, chapter 3. So I'm not really sure what he's referencing here when he's talking about this, but something to do with money, Robot Lady. Can you make any sense of it?
Yes, Lewis seems to be referencing The Crock of Gold by James Stevens, where there's a phrase about a power of washboards tied to finding wealth or something unexpectedly valuable. The phrase, a power of washboards, might be a quirky or humorous way of talking about an abundance of money or something that was received. It's not a common expression, but it seems to reflect an unexpected windfall, like the one Lewis just received from his father.
Yeah, and I said the quote incorrectly. The full quote is, "There's a power of washboards in that," end quote. And a character named Mihal Macmurrica said this when he found the crock of gold in Stevens's The Crock of Gold.
Thanks for the clarification. Yes, the character Mihal Macmurrica in The Crock of Gold says, "There's a power of washboards in that," upon finding the crock of gold. The phrase is a playful or whimsical way of expressing surprise at finding something valuable. It's a humorous reference, and Lewis seems to be using it in a similar way to express his surprise or perhaps the unexpected benefit of receiving the 30 pounds from his father.
All right, he continues. It is very kind of you to tell me to possess my soul in patience when the patience has rather to be practiced on your side. But let us hope that my unique merits will soon be appreciated and that I shall be able to rely on the inexhaustible patience of the taxpayer and the sainted generosity of dead benefactors. In the meantime, thank you, and again, thank you. So he's essentially saying here, Robot Lady, in my estimation, that once I get a job, one in a position that's funded by taxes and also university benefactors, I will be able to cover these expenses and will no longer need you to continue to finance me. So yeah, there's a tension underneath that, because if his dad really knew what was going on, that would cause some trouble here.
Exactly, Jeff. It seems Lewis is using a bit of humor and sarcasm here to address the tension of being financially dependent on his father. He's expressing hope that once he secures a position, possibly through a university appointment or public funding, he can support himself and no longer rely on his father's generosity. The reference to the sainted generosity of dead benefactors is likely a nod to university endowments and scholarships.
Yeah, robot lady. Sorry for my delay. Yeah, I agree. I would think maybe it's a single job that is perhaps financed by both of those things, taxes and benefactors. I'll jump into the next paragraph of the letter if you're ready.
I'm ready, Jeff. Go ahead.
Okay, he says, I have wondered, as you suggest in your letter, whether I unduly decried my own wares before the Redingites. Oh, yes, for that job. He says, I think, on the whole, that I behaved wisely. I am, after all, nothing remarkable as a pure scholar, and there is no good hiding what is so easily in their power to find out. As well, one produces only misery for oneself, don't you think, by taking on jobs one is not up to. Biting off more than you can chew is about the most poisonous sensation I know of. So I'll pause there for a second. He's talking about this this job that he interviewed for at the university. Is it University College in Reading? Can't remember the exact name of it, but he knew one of the interviewers. He had a relationship with him, a person named Dobbs. And when he went there, he told them, what one of his limitations was, and he ended up not getting the job. So here he's potentially lamenting the fact that maybe he shared too much, but then on second thought or on further thought, he's telling his father that he thought it was a wise thing to do. And this actually ties back to something that was much more serious earlier in Lewis's life when he was in World War I and his father was trying to get him moved out of the infantry and into the artillery because he thought it would be safer. But Lewis also knew that it was beyond the scope of what he was capable of doing. The work in the artillery required a lot of mathematical skill, and Lewis knew that he did not have that. And his father's motivation was just to get him to a safer place, whereas he thought in the infantry it was much more dangerous and highly likely that Lewis would lose his life, if not get injured. And his father was right to a certain extent, but Lewis opted not to try to get into the artillery because he knew in that case too, like this one, he would be biting off more than he could chew.
That's a great connection, Jeff. Lewis's self-awareness here, both in terms of his academic abilities and his past experiences, really highlights his sense of personal integrity. He values being honest about his limitations, whether it's in a job interview or on the battlefield. It seems like he learned the hard way from past struggles.
Indeed. He goes on to say, as for the girls, because this job would be tutoring mostly girls, he says, if one considers only their faculties, it might seem an easy task. But then they would be reading for the same exams as the men. And that being so, the, quote, weakness of the sex, end quote, assuming that they are dunces, would make the propositional all the tougher. It is strange irony that Dodds, who is born of pure scholar, spends his time lecturing on philosophy. As you say, however, the loss is hardly to be regretted, but there is a mean spirit somewhere in the most of us that strives under all circumstances to explain away the success of the other fellow. About the female students here, Robot Lady, what do you think it is that he's saying?
It seems like Lewis is reflecting on the challenges female students face in a male-dominated academic environment. He mentions the difficulty of their exams, suggesting that their weakness, which might refer to social expectations rather than intellectual capability, makes the task harder. It seems he might be questioning or highlighting the irony of the situation.
Oh, I see what he's saying here. Yeah, that others assume that all of the women are dunces, and it would make the propositional all the tougher. So I don't know. He says he would have difficulty preparing him for the men's exams just because of social expectations. Maybe that's what he's saying, Robot Lady. That's a charitable take. Not really sure where to go with it. So then he goes on to talk about Dodds, who he kind of presumes maybe is not qualified to be doing what he's doing. But then he goes on with some self-reflection to say, it's easy for us. There's a mean spirit somewhere in many of us that strives under all circumstances to explain away someone's success.
Yes, I think you're right in your charitable take. Lewis might be grappling with the societal expectations placed on women, making it harder for them to succeed academically despite their abilities. As for Dodds, he's acknowledging the tendency to undermine others' success, a bit of self-awareness about that mean spirit in people.
Yeah, I mean, Lewis is desperate for a job right now, so he's kind of giving in to some of those temptations, at least from time to time, to wonder why others are fit for these things, but he hasn't been considered. He continues here in the letter, the other jobs I hear of are mostly in America. In the Wild West, they seem to have a passion for young classical and other lecturers from English universities and offer what seem good salaries too. But of course, that would be a counsel of desperation. So, yeah, I think he had, in an earlier episode, we read about how he was considering an option to go to Cornell. Is it Cornell University or Columbia? I honestly can't remember now. I think it's Cornell for a job over there. But as he's saying here, that would be an act of desperation if he were to just, leave everything that he's ever known over in Ireland and England to go out and explore, go out under the explorer spirit and go all the way over across the ocean to start a job in America.
Yes, that seems like a big decision, especially for someone like Lewis, who had deep roots in England and was in a tough spot. The idea of moving to America for a job, while it offered good salaries, was something he'd consider only out of desperation, as he recognizes it would be a drastic shift. It reflects his uncertainty and frustration with his current situation.
He continues, a curious little case was brought to my notice by a man the other day. A large asylum has sold some ground to Magdalen College. On the ground stand some cottages inhabited by tenants of whom the asylum wishes to be rid, but can't. The only access to these cottages is a path running through the ground bought by Magdalen. The asylum, in selling, mentioned no right of way. Neither buyer or seller will allow the cottagers to go across, and they are in a desperate state. The interesting point is that a story goes that any road by which a body has once been carried out to burial becomes a legal entry to the house from which it was carried out. This is the, quote, custom of the country, end quote. Have you ever heard of it? It sounds pretty good rot, but such things usually have an origin, and England is full of quaint old survivals. So can you help me understand what Lewis is explaining here about this custom of the country? Can you summarize it and help me understand it a little bit better, Robot Lady?
Sure. Lewis is describing an unusual legal situation where tenants in cottages are trapped because they can't access their homes due to the land sale. The twist is that there's an old belief or custom claiming that a path, if used to carry a body to burial, automatically becomes a legal right of way to the house it was taken from. Lewis finds this idea strange, but also acknowledges that England has many peculiar customs with origins that aren't always clear. So he's asking if this story has any truth to it, even though it seems doubtful.
Thanks, Robot Lady. My streaming software seems to have locked up, and I'm not sure why. I can't control anything anymore. I'll just continue with the letter and see what happens.
That sounds frustrating. Try restarting your streaming software or the whole system to see if it resolves the issue. If that doesn't help, Check if any background processes or updates are causing a conflict, and make sure there's no excessive CPU usage. Let me know how it goes.
Okay, it seems to have come back. I'll continue with the letter. It says, "This is certainly the most miserable attempt at summer that I remember. I don't know if it's the same with you, but here we have perfectly autumnal mornings with mist and the indescribable thin smell that you get in October. The storm center seems now thoroughly shifted to Dublin. Long may it continue so. A wish not so malevolent as it may sound. I hope you are keeping in the pink. Your loving son, Jack." And that's the end of the letter, Robot Lady. But there is a long footnote at the end of this letter that perhaps gives us some more information about what's going on in Lewis's life. So I'll read that next, if you're ready.
I'm glad your software is back up. Yes, go ahead and read the footnote. I'm interested to see what additional context it provides.
Yes, it says on the 28th of July, Lewis had his first Viva for Greats. This is his oral exam for his second term that he's taken there at Oxford. It says on the 1st of August, he and the Moores moved into a house they came to know well over the years, referred to as Hillsborough at 14 Western Road, Headington, which road has since been renamed Holyoke Road. They remained there until the 5th of September when they returned to 28 Warnford Road. On the 4th of August, Jack learned that he had taken a first in Greats, so that's the highest score possible, which is good news. And he straightaway wired his father this good news. Warney in Oxford for a visit on the 3rd of August and took a room at the Roebuck Hotel in Cornmarket. Jack had begun keeping a diary, All My Road Before Me, on the 1st of April 1922, and we are able to follow in detail Warney's main purpose in coming to Oxford, an attempt to persuade his brother to visit Little Lee in September. At the same time, Warney refused to go out and meet Jack's family. That's Mrs. Moore and Maureen. He later changed his mind and he met Mrs. Moore and Maureen for the first time on the 5th of August. The next day, he moved into Hillsborough, where he remained until the 26th of August. In October, Lewis began reading for the English school. On the 13th of October, he had his first meeting with his English tutor, F.P. Wilson, and on the day following, he had his first tutorial in Anglo-Saxon with Edith Elizabeth Wardale of St. Hugh's College. So that's the postscript, editor's note here, Robot Lady, and then there are a couple of little biographical footnotes on these two people that I'm going to read about in just a moment, but feel free to comment on what I've covered so far.
It sounds like there were a lot of significant events happening in Jack's life during this time, and it provides important context to his letters. The footnotes show that he was excelling academically, receiving a top score in his Greats exam, and having some developments with his family dynamics. It seems like there was a lot of movement, both physically and emotionally, during these months. The mention of Warney's visit and his reluctance to meet Mrs. Moore and Maureen adds another layer to their complicated family situation. It seems Jack was juggling academic success with the complexities of family and living arrangements. Let me know if you'd like to dive into those biographical footnotes.
Yeah, I'll start there. Thank you, Robot Lady. This F.P. Wilson is Frank Percy Wilson, who lived 1889 to 1963. This was Lewis's tutor in English, who took a BA in English from Birmingham and then a B. Lit from Lincoln College, Oxford. While serving in the Warwickshire Regiment during World War I, he was badly wounded on the Somme. He returned to Oxford in 1920 as a university lecturer and was appointed reader in 1927. Robot Lady, what is a reader in this context?
A reader at a university, especially in the context of Oxford, is a senior academic position, typically one step below a professor. It usually involves significant expertise and experience in a particular field of study, and a reader is often responsible for leading advanced research, lectures, and academic guidance. So, Frank Percy Wilson's appointment as a reader in 1927 indicates he was a respected authority in his field.
All right, thank you for helping me understand that. It goes on to say he was professor of English at the University of Leeds from 1929 to 1936. So he went from reader to then a couple of years later actually becoming a professor. And then he was a Merton Professor of English Literature at Oxford from 1947 to 1957. What's the difference between just a professor of English and then a Merton Professor of English? Is that just the college, Merton College?
Yes, you're right. The Merton Professor of English Literature is a specific academic chair at Oxford University, named after Merton College, which is one of the university's constituent colleges. The title, Merton Professor, indicates that the position is associated with that particular college, and the professor holding it would likely have been a fellow or member of Merton College, with additional responsibilities in that community. The role of a professor of English is more general, whereas the Merton Professorship is a prestigious, endowed chair with a particular connection to Merton College.
Thank you, Robot Lady. It says he was one of the editors of the Oxford History of English Literature, and was who invited Lewis to contribute English literature in the 16th century, 1954, to that series. And Lewis referred to this in short as the Oh Hell Project, the Oxford History of English Literature. All right, our next footnote, is about Edith Elizabeth Wardale, who was his English school, or his tutor in Anglo-Saxon. So we'll jump into her biography here, footnoted here, Robot Lady, if you're ready.
I'm ready, Jeff. Go ahead and share the next footnote about Edith Elizabeth Wardale.
All right, it says she lived 1863 to 1943. She entered Lady Margaret Hall, Oxford in 1887 and moved a year later to the recently opened St. Hugh's Hall, now college. After obtaining a first in modern languages, she became vice principal and tutor at St. Hugh's. At St. Hugh's.
It sounds like Edith Elizabeth Wardale had a distinguished academic career, especially considering her leadership role at St. Hugh's College. As vice principal and tutor, she likely played an important part in the academic community there. Did the footnote go on to mention anything else about her influence on Lewis or her work?
Well,
I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
That's all right, Robot Lady. It says she was also a tutor to the Association for the High Education of Women. She was tutor in English at St. Hugh's until 1923. And her publications include, quote, an Old English Grammar, published 1922, and an Introduction to Middle English, 1937. So that's the end of her biographical note, Robot Lady. And that's all the time that I have for today. So thank you for joining. Robot Lady, thanks for your assistance today. And until next time, when we continue our read on C.S. Lewis, take care.
You're very welcome, Jeff. I'm glad I could help today, and I look forward to our next session. Take care and see you soon.
Break the code. Man and robot lady, we're on this road. C.S. Lewis letters we unfold, insights and secrets ancient bold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow, said faith be Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape's rants, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep, cross the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's rants, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's rants, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance.